Is there something more than instructions for how to live life in this book? Kind of a loaded question, but I do think that many of us, many who have grown up in the church, hearing the message, I think we've heard the message that you should be reading this book, you should read it every day, you should be in this book all the time. In fact, your own pastor just said that, I think, literally last week. I stood up here and I'm like, you should love this book. You should treasure this book and be in this book every day. And I know your pastor. His heart was in the right place when he said that. But I do. I often think that whether it's said this way or our minds process it in this way, I think what we hear is this message that we should be in this book every day because we will find truth in this book for that day that will help us, answer the questions that we have, solve the problems that come up. In a sense, I think we hear the idea that we should go to this book every day and find truth that is relevant for that day or for what we're going through. I heard one preacher say, this was long ago, he said, the will of God is exactly what we would do if we knew all the facts. And this book, he would say, contained all the facts. And so you go to this book every day, you find the facts, and then you'll know that day how to actually live out the will of God. And, there's some truth to that. And there's going to be some blessing in just sitting with this book every day. But here's my concern. My concern is that the Bible can become kind of the place that we go every day, primarily to find kind of how-to advice, like how to do this, how to do that, how to navigate this, or it's the place that we go to find, tell me what to do information. Now again, that's not all bad. It's just not necessarily the main priority of this book. I think when we look at it like that, it almost becomes like that other thick book that sits in our glove compartment that we only pull out when there's like a warning light that goes off that we've never seen before. Or if you're like me, it's a warning light that I keep forgetting like what it actually means. So I grab that book because the book has the information, it has the truth that can help me solve that issue, and then I can put it back and grab it when another issue comes up. And I think if we're not careful, the Bible can kind of fall into that category, and we can start going to the Bible primarily to find just things relevant for the day that we're in and the questions that we have that day. When we do that, we are viewing the Bible, I think, as something far less than what it actually is. That's my concern. This book isn't primarily how to play the game, kind of rules to how to play the game book. This book, the Bible, is primarily, it's a gift from God that He gave to us that we would know Him better, that we would know and receive Him, and we would have, I don't think it's going too far, that we would have vision and answers to some of the deepest questions that our hearts are actually asking. And I think that's the deeper purpose of this book. Over the next 3 times together, so that would be this morning, next Sunday morning, and then Christmas Eve, what we're going to do is something a bit different. We are simply going to retell the story of this entire book. We're going to celebrate and enjoy and kind of recount the entire story, beginning in Genesis and going all the way through Revelation. You know me. You know the way I like to study together as a church. I like to pick a book, and I like to go through that book one chapter at a time, one verse at a time, and I really enjoy that. This year it was 1 Samuel. Probably the next 10 years it'll be 2 Samuel. Partially kidding. But I love doing that. But I feel, and I think we all do, I feel like sometimes it's good just to pull back and just enjoy the whole story. and look at the whole story, have it refreshed in our minds. In our family, we love the BBC version of the movie Pride and Prejudice. And it's about 5.5 hours. I say we, pretty much all of us. I don't think my son loves that movie necessarily. But we will, almost once a year, we'll sit down and in one sitting, we will watch that 5.5 hour movie. And if you were to ask any of our daughters, any question you want about the plot or the characters or who said what at what point, they could tell you. They just know the whole story. And there's a sense in which at times I feel like I want to be able to do that better with the Bible. And I want us to be able to do that with the Bible. Just see and know and celebrate the whole story. And I think that's what this season is for. In part because the Bible is a single unified book. It's actually 66 books, but it's a single unified book. It has one author, one divine author. He's an incredible storyteller. And it is a unified book. It has a beginning, it has a middle, it has an end. And what makes it unified, I would suggest to you, is a theme. What's the theme that unifies the entire story of the Bible, of all 66 books in the Bible? And I would say the theme is this, and I can answer that question with a name. The name is Emmanuel. And that name Emmanuel means God with us. I would say the theme of this entire book is that God desires to be with us. And we're just going to look at the beginning of the story this morning. If you'll turn there with me to Genesis chapter 1. Genesis chapter 1. I'll just begin with the first 2 verses. This is how our story begins. It says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters." On one hand, we read those 2 verses at the beginning of the Bible, and we are clearly interacting with the one true God. He is a transcendent being, which means everything about him, his ways are above us, they're beyond us. He is prior to anything created. There's only 2 categories in all of life: the category of the one uncreated God, and then the category of all things that he created. And that's the God we're dealing with. We're dealing with this infinitely holy, transcendent, powerful. This God is so powerful that he just has to say the words of what he wants to see happen, and his word has the power to make it happen. Just look at verses 3 through 5 as an example. "And God said, 'Let there be light.' And there was light. And God saw that the light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day." So right away, that's the God that we're dealing with. We're dealing with the one true God. There's only one God. He is infinitely powerful. He is transcendent. He is before all things. He's the one that created all things. And this is our God. This is the one at the beginning of the story. When we see that, then what we read next in the rest of chapter 1 and in chapter 2, I think is rather mind-blowing. Because what we read next in Genesis 1 and 2 is that this God, transcendent God, infinite God, actually creates a home. One of the ways to view Genesis 1 and 2, I think perhaps the most accurate way of viewing it, is God is building a home. It's a home building passage, and he builds a home in Genesis 1 and 2. A home for whom? So this is kind of shocking when, again, we're aware of the God that we're talking about here. God is building a home for himself and his people. I think we oftentimes think we get to Genesis 1 and 2 and we're like, yeah, that's the creation of all things, and And it's really a place that he created for Adam and Eve, for people. This is a home building passage, and the people for whom God is building this home, it's for himself and it's for his people. I know that that's a bit strange. I know that that language and that idea is a bit strange. I think it's not necessarily instinctive for us. We have kind of a modern way of viewing a passage like this, and it's not necessarily easy or instinctive for us to see this as a home building passage, because I think what we do, and I think this is just the set of lenses we all bring to the text. We go to these passages and we're looking for answers to the what questions, the material questions, right? The what questions. Questions like, what was the material that God worked with? What was it actually that he made Adam out of? What was it, that the darkness covered the earth? What was that darkness? We ask questions like, what was the amount of time that God actually took to create all things? We'll have great debates on, is it a literal day? Are these days more symbolic of a season of time? But those are what questions. We'll ask the question of what was the date of this event? Meaning, like, what was the number of years from today going backwards that this took place? Was it fairly recent? Was it ancient? Was it a long time ago? And we'll have all of these debates on the what questions. And grace to us. I mean that. It is not our fault that we were born after modernism. We were born into this modern way of thinking. We were born after the Enlightenment. We were born after the scientific method was developed. This is just simply how we think. And grace to us, because we didn't choose that. But it is something we need to see and understand. We simply don't think like the ancient author. We don't think like the ancient readers, the one that when Moses sat down to write Genesis, he was writing to ancient readers. And we don't think like the author, we don't think like the reader. But let me ask you this. But where is the meaning in the text found? Is it found in the instincts of the modern thinker and reader? Or is it found in the actual intent and purpose of writing of the ancient author? Well, of course, it's clearly going to be found in the purpose and the intent of the one who wrote it, of the ancient author. And just to acknowledge that makes it difficult to study ancient texts. Like, it's difficult to study the words of an infinitely holy, transcendent God anyway, but when we sit down and realize that the glasses that I sit down to read this book with are not even necessarily the right glasses, I'm not going to ask the right questions of the text. There's additional work that we must do to understand the author and understand his point and to get to the meaning of the text. When we do that, and this is hard work for me, by the way, I have to read books. I have to sit under people who can teach me and help me see what Moses thought like and what his audience would have thought like. But when we do this, we will see that the ancient thinker, the ancient author of Genesis, was more concerned with the why questions. Or we could say the who questions. So, for example, why did God create at all? Like, clearly we're dealing with the one true God. He's infinitely perfect. He's infinitely satisfied. We're going to see in the creation account, he's actually infinitely relationally satisfied as a Trinity. He didn't need anything. So the question would be appropriate, like, why did this God create it all? Like, what's in his heart? Why did he do this? The question of why did he make humanity in his image? That's an important question. Or Even the question of why is it that by the end of Genesis 3, humanity is no longer with God? How did that happen? How did sin happen? See, these are important questions. When we ask those questions and we bring that set of lenses to the text, we can see that in the first 6 days of creation, what God is doing, as He is the God who created all things out of nothing. There was nothing that existed prior to His creation. But the 6 days of creation are showing us God's interaction with something right there in front of Him, right? Someplace chaotic, someplace with darkness. And what we see is a process whereby in 6 days, God is ordering what is chaotic. He's giving purpose, He's giving function, He's giving meaning. He's taking something disorganized and chaotic and purposeless, and He's turning it into something perfectly good, ordered, functioning. The 6 days of creation are showing us that God is preparing a place that He Himself, as the good, infinitely perfect creator, He Himself can actually enter and live in. Now, for this reason, many people consider Genesis 1 and 2 as temple narrative, or you could say temple building narrative. And again, this is how the ancient thinker would have read this. What I mean by that is it is the account of God making a home or a dwelling place that is suitable for Him to live, a place that He will be able to enter at the end of it because it's good, it's perfect, it's good enough for Him, and He can live there. And this makes day 7 incredibly important, and I think helps us understand day 7. That's the day where all the work was done and God rested from His work. What that is showing us is that God's intent with the first 6 days, God's intention for all of creation was to, at the end of it, when it was done, nothing more was needed, it was perfect, His intention was to enter it, to make it His home, to make it His place of rest. Now again, this isn't our fault, but that we don't think like this, but the ancient thinker would have got this immediately, because the way ancient thinkers thought in their worlds, like the Greco-Roman world with their numerous gods, they just knew that if you have a God, that God doesn't float around out there in space. That God has to have a place. If you want that God with you, and you want the benefits of that God working around you, like on your crops or in your homes, you have to have a home for that God, a place for that God. And an ancient thinker knew that is simply the temple. That's the place where that God dwells, rests. And you'll see temples all over the ancient Middle East or the ancient Near East, because that was the assumption. You don't have a home for your God's not going to be there. And so day 7 in our creation account in Genesis, that's the day that we see God enter the creation He just made good in order to rest. Now, that does not mean take a nap, like some of us will do later today. Remember, the Bible says that our God neither sleeps nor slumbers. He literally never sleeps. No, to take up His rest means to actually enter into, the work is done, it's time to enjoy living here with the people that I have created. That's the picture of Genesis 1 and 2. One of my favorite Christmas songs is a song by Charles Wesley, and we'll probably sing it sometime in the next couple weeks. Hark the Herald Angels Sing. And there's a line in that song that I particularly love. It says, "Veiled in flesh the Godhead see, hail the incarnate deity, pleased with us in flesh to dwell, Jesus our Emmanuel." Pleased with us in flesh to dwell. I think I've done this before. I think we tend to think of the incarnation as being the moment when God was pleased to dwell with us. There is something unique to the incarnation we'll talk about next week, but It's not the moment that God was pleased to dwell with us. That's Genesis 1:1. It's the very first thing that we learn about this God is the answer to why did he create anything? And then even the answer of why did he create us in his image? It all gets back to the answer of he created us and he created all things in order to be with us, to dwell with us. He's a God of love. He's a God who wants to be with his people that he has created. After all, it's in Genesis 1-3 that we have that picture of God walking in the garden with Adam and Eve, right? And what that shows us is that, and I'm not sure I saw this for a long time, God didn't create the garden for Adam and Eve. He didn't just create the garden and say, this is for you, go enjoy it. He created the garden in order to live with Adam and Eve. That he would live with people and dwell with people. I had a friend years ago, he's still a friend that doesn't live here anymore, but we used to have some conversations. He was just honest about the fact that he would say, I'm a deist. In deism, that's the belief that there is a God, there is a creator, he created all things, and then he stepped out of that creation. And he could do that because he created all things with, all the natural processes that we see and we study, and so he detached from his creation, and he kind of sits back and he watches, but he doesn't engage, he doesn't direct. And this friend would, say, this is what I believe, but he'd want to talk about the Bible. And there's not a place in the Bible you can go to actually find deism, especially the creation account. We would go to Genesis over and over again, and we would just see this God that doesn't even give deism a place in conversation, because the God of Genesis 1 and 2 is a God who didn't create all things and step out. He's a God that created all things to step in and to be with and to enjoy fellowship with his people and let us know him. He's a self-giving God. He doesn't want to hide himself from us. He wanted to give himself to us through creation. And by the way, he wanted us to understand ourselves better. And the creation narrative, chapters 1-3, help us do that as well. I think one of the questions that we've all asked, I think especially in our younger years, we all ask the question what's the purpose to my life? Or we'll look around, we'll see everything, and we'll be like, what's it all about? Why am I here? What's the meaning for my life? Why am I here? What's my purpose? And in Genesis 1-3, I can clearly tell you that God's not holding back any information, any answers to those questions. The creation account tells us those things very clearly. You and I are here to be fruitful, right? We are here to multiply. We are here to exercise dominion. And by the way, exercise dominion in the way that our God and Creator exercises dominion. So it's not like the power-hungry abuse of power we see today. The way our God exercises dominion is by causing people and environments to teem with life, to flourish. It's always for the welfare and the benefit of everything around him. And we're to do that. We're to exercise dominion in such a way that, like our God, we cause people and environments to flourish, to thrive, to be their best. And we're here to represent God to one another and to all of creation. By the way, we see this. I'm going to have you look at this with me. We're just going to look at a couple passages, but we see this purpose in Genesis 1, starting in verse 26. Then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it. and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing that moves on the earth. Again, going back to temple language, because I think it's Genesis 1 and 2. But to use temple language, one of the ways that we can answer the question of why am I here? What's my purpose? You and I together, as human beings, male and female, as image bearers, you and I are to be priests to our God. What do priests do? Well, they go out and they represent God. They work for God. They speak for God. But what that means, according to the creation account, is we are to go out and all of these things, being fruitful, multiplying, exercising dominion, all of what we do in a way that other people and that all of creation can look at us and they can say, man, I see a bit of God there. I can see qualities of God. I can see how they're representing God and how they're out there as priests of their God. It helps me see the qualities of God and the goodness of God. And if you farm here in this area, if you farm in central Nebraska, or if you're a teacher in a school system in this area, or a business owner, and you run your business kind of in this part of the state, we just read, like, the intention was never that Adam and Eve and their offspring would stay in Eden. No, the intention would be that Eden was the place of creation, the place God dwelt with them, but they would go out and there would be this expansion, there would be this moving out into all of God's creation. And no matter where you are, you would represent God and you would do the work that God gave you to do in a way that people could see you and see the fruit of your work, and it would direct them to glorify the God that you're representing. And I just think that gives incredible meaning to our lives and to our work, in our homes, right? Into the simple things of life. And I think it gives challenge. Do you farm or teach or lead in such a way that the people just around you, the people that would bump into you or watch you work, will walk away from that interaction with you thinking about the goodness and the order and the creativity of our God? That's the call, right? Do you treat people in every sphere of your life? Do you treat people with such a divine kindness and gentleness and generosity and in a self-giving way that people walk away from time with you and they're like, I saw God through them. I feel like I just communed with God by being around this person. See, those are the directions and the vision and the pictures that Genesis 1 and 2 give us, that if we go to those passages asking the what questions, how old is the earth, we'll never interact with what the author was actually wanting to give us. So this is where the story begins. It begins with this infinite God, this transcendent God, that all of a sudden, surprisingly, we see his heart. He wants to create because he wants to be with you and me, with men and women. And this is where the story begins. And where it begins matters a lot, because if we don't start with that picture, we're not going to be able to make much sense of the middle of the story. We're really not going to understand the end of the story. And I say this because we oftentimes don't start there. And I've done this too, but when we go out to share the story, when we go out to share the gospel, how do we often start? You're messed up, right? Like, this world has gone to hell in a handbag. It's a mess, right? We start with, you are a sinner, I'm a sinner, it's all ruined. And that's how we start the story. That's not the beginning of the story. The beginning of the story is this picture of the one person we needed to be with, because he was actually not just a person, he's a person, but he's actually our source of everything in life we need. Joy, vibrancy, health, relational health, peace, hope, security, a future. All of that was meant, we were created to have that sourced in God. And the beginning picture is we had that God. He created us to give that to us, to be with us, to meet every need we have, so that we would have unending joy. That's the beginning of the picture. That's the beginning of the story. But it's clearly not the story that we're living. Are you living in that picture today? Are you living in Genesis 1 and 2? I doubt it. Early in the week, this week, a mouse got into our house and pooped in our bathtub. That's not Eden. About that same day, it might have been the same day, we picked up another nail in our tire on a gravel road and had to have Paulsers take it out. That didn't happen in Eden. Early in the week, I went in for 2 biopsies to rule out cancer in 2 different places of my body. I'm optimistic, but that's not Eden. This past month, one of my favorite teachers and mentors, one of the men who's taught me the most about grace and truth and how these things are married together, he died way too young of cancer this last month. Just this morning, one of our elders' daughters died way too early. Just did her wedding 19 years ago. That's really not Eden. Some of you are in a marriage that is falling apart or is in effect over. Some of you are a part of a mean-spirited argument or division at your school. Perhaps a parent involved in that, or in your workplace. Some of you are facing serious financial issues, serious life-threatening physical issues. You don't need me to actually answer the question of whether you think that you're living in Genesis 1 and 2 anymore. We all know we're not. And we're not actually left, God in his goodness doesn't leave us to guess at what happened. We actually see what happened in Genesis chapter 3. It's in Genesis chapter 3 that the goodness of God and the perfection of God in creation unravels, and it unravels because of human sin. I read this last week. Somebody else said this about Adam, and I thought, that's perfect. I'm not going to say it better. But somebody said about Adam, he called Adam the index case. And I think if you're a doctor or a researcher, that's familiar language. But he said Adam's the index case, or the patient zero, meaning he's the first diagnosis of the disease that has sickened and condemned all of us to death. The disease. It's that we desire godlike autonomy and isolation. From whom? Well, we want to be autonomous and isolated from God himself. From the very one who created us out of nothing but love and goodness, to be with us, to meet all our needs, to have us satisfied beyond what any of us in this room can imagine satisfaction feels like. But in Genesis chapter 3, our first parents, in whom was our seed, they are our representatives, they chose in paradise, they chose to be autonomous from God, isolated from God, to be able to do for themselves what God was meant to do for them. Let me just show you this. This is one of the other passages we'll read. Genesis 3, verses 1 through 7. Says, "Now the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, 'Did God actually say, you shall not eat of any tree in the garden?' And the woman said to the serpent, 'We may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but God said, you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die." But the serpent said to the woman, "You will not surely die. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. And she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. Then the eyes of both were opened, and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves loincloths. The consequences of that sin, of that choice to be autonomous and isolated from God, to try to have God-like knowledge apart from relationship with God, the consequences of that sin was death. Physical death, but a death of a kind that is far more grave and serious than physical death, and that is spiritual death. A permanent, unending cutting off or removal from the presence and relationship of the one that we were made to have all of our life sourced from. It was a removal from God himself. In fact, I thought about it this week. There's maybe a strange way that we can view physical death as a part of the curse, as almost a mercy from God. We can almost view it as if God said, there's a consequence to this, for sure. This changes everything, but I'm not going to make you live for all eternity in a body that won't die, with a spirit, a soul, a heart that is dead. I'm not going to doom you to that eternal life and death as one disunified human being. So there's almost a mercy to the idea of physical death and a limit to our time on this earth. But Adam and Eve were exiled out of Eden, which meant they were exiled out of the temple, the place where God dwelt with them. They were exiled away from his presence, which is the source of everything that we need. And that's where the creation narrative ends. Sort of. If it ended there, it would end without hope. And it doesn't end without hope. Strangely, there is hope in Genesis chapter 3, and the hope takes the form of a promise. And the promise, oddly, falls within the form of a curse that God gives to the serpent. But the promise, the hope that is in the promise is that one day God would solve our problem of the serpent and the devil and our sin and death. And he would solve that problem through a seed or an offspring of the woman. Look with me at Genesis 3, verses 14 and 15. The Lord God said to the serpent, "Because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and above all beasts of the field. On your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between her offspring, or your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel." So the promise there in the curse, the promise is that God would defeat sin and death and the devil and the serpent once and for all through the seed of the woman. Now, not without a fight and not without great cost, because he would also bruise her heel. There would be blood, there would be pain for the offspring of the woman. But ultimately, this seed that God is promising would deal the final death blow to the serpent, to the destruction the serpent caused, to human sin, to this removal of the presence of God with us. That would be through the seed that God promised. Real quickly, because we're going to jump into the incarnation next week, one of the ways to view the rest of the Old Testament is the rest of the Old Testament is this fantastic, almost crazy story at times of God further developing the promise of the seed and of this salvation through the seed. The seed would be further explained and clarified and defined throughout the rest of the Old Testament. Just to give you some examples, remember the moment that God took Abraham out and told him to look up at the stars and then said, count them? And Abraham's like, I can't count the stars. There's too many. And God said, yeah, in the same way, through the seed, through the promised offspring, now through Abraham, that's the same number of people from all across the world that I'm going to bless and that will find life in my promise through you. And we see in Abraham, we also see that idea that it's not just Israel, it's not just Abraham's family, but all the nations of the world will be blessed through this seed. Moses, we get to Moses. Moses was a prophet for God. He spoke for God, but he wasn't a perfect prophet. Moses stuttered. He was insecure about that. He was unsure of himself. He also couldn't see God face to face. He wanted to. But through Moses, God declares that one day there will be a perfect prophet. This seed, this offspring, will be a perfect prophet. He will be able to see God face to face, and he will speak the words of God to man perfectly, with the authority of God himself. That's the seed. The priesthood, we see the priesthood, the system of the priesthood develop, and then we see the priesthood collapse in the Old Testament. We see it in part in our story in Samuel. These corrupt priests, right, that are not doing what priests ought to do. But through the collapse of the priest system, there are several promises in the Old Testament where God says, but I will, in the seed, I will bring you a faithful high priest, one that will be for the people and will not be corrupt. Now, there was a little bit of a surprise to come for those in the Old Testament about this priest, because this priest would end up offering the perfect, final, once and for all sacrifice for our sins. So a second sacrifice would never be needed. One sacrifice, and we stand perfect before God for all time. And the surprise would be that the sacrifice was his own life, was his blood. And many I say surprise because many in the Old Testament that had the scriptures, and we would have too, they missed it. But that's developed about the seed. And then in the books that we're studying, 1st and 2nd Samuel, especially when we get into 2nd Samuel, we also learn about this seed or this offspring now that will now go through David. He will actually sit on David's throne for all of eternity. In 2 Samuel, God promises that the throne that he's establishing through David is a throne that will never end. It'll never leave his house. And he promises that the seed, who is going to be the perfect prophet, perfect priest, will also be the perfect king. And he will sit upon that throne for all of eternity and reign in a way that not even David reigned. We get to the prophets, and they even develop and sharpen the picture of the seed further. And we won't look at all of them, but to give you an example, Micah declared that this seed, this king, would actually come from Bethlehem. You get to Isaiah, and Isaiah actually adds titles and positions to this king and this promised one. He calls him Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. This is all the seed that was promised in Genesis chapter 3. So no, we're not left without hope at the end of Genesis chapter 3. We today are especially not left without hope because we have further revelation. We have more of the story. We have the story that I can promise you every faithful person in the pages of the Old Testament would have loved to have seen and heard, because we actually have this story and we have the revelation of that seed coming and fulfilling all the promises and all the prophecies in the Old Testament about him. And that's what we'll celebrate next week. For this morning, I want to somehow invite you into the awe and the wonder of who our God is from the beginning of the story. The beginning of the story shows you one of the most important things to know about the God that created you, and that is he created you to be with you. He created you because he loves you. But he created all things because his heart is to be with us, to be with his people. No matter what you're going through this Christmas season, no matter how the fall has touched you or the curse has touched you or somebody else's sin has touched you or your sin is ruining something precious in your own life, no matter what pain or loss you're going through, I know I'm right there. I'm just like you. When we go through those things, the first instinct in our mind is to ask the question, why? Why is this happening? Why is this good? Why, God, why am I going through this? Why are you letting this person go through this? And it would do no good to tell us not to ask that question. It's just like, you hit me right here, I'm going to jerk this leg, right? We go through pain and loss and the ugliness of sin in this world, and it's just instinctive to ask that why question, even though it does no good to ask the why question. It does no good. We're doomed the second we hang our hope and our joy on getting an answer to that why question. It does no good. We will never know the mind of God. I think it's enough at times for us to know what the answer isn't. The answer to why we're going through these things is not that God doesn't love you, or he doesn't care, or that he is a God that just created, put processes in place, stepped out, and doesn't really feel anything. The answer to that question is not that God doesn't want to be with you, that you stink to him. No, we read the beginning of the story. It's the very heart of God. It's the very fabric of creation that he loves us. He made us in his image to be with him and to be able to relate with him. He created all things because he wants to be with us. We ruined that abode. My sin ruined that home with God. But that's what we'll celebrate next week is we may have ruined that home and that dwelling with God, but it didn't change who God is. It didn't change his purpose in creation. He still wants to be with us. Another reason we know that the answer to the why question is not that he doesn't love us or he doesn't want to be with us, is that he sent his own son into this exact same world of pain and death and loss and curse and blood. And he sent his own son into this killing field to accomplish the mission of actually removing any barrier, all the barriers that Satan and our sin and death had put in place that would separate us from God. And through his son, he's already accomplished the work. It's done. There's nothing left to do. But I'm just saying, the answer to the why questions is it's impossible. It cannot be that God doesn't love us, or that he doesn't care, or that he doesn't know what we're going through, or that he doesn't want to be with us. Genesis 1 and 2 disprove that. The incarnation disproves that. He deeply loves us. And my hope for this Christmas is, these next few weeks, is I just pray that the love of God toward you and seeing his heart and his desire to be with you and how far he went in that desire to be with you by sending his own son to actually live and die in order to accomplish that dwelling with us for all eternity. I just hope that strengthens your heart if you're dealing with a weak heart this Christmas. If you're going through something hard, I actually hope it does more than strengthen and encourage us. I hope it absolutely creates awe and wonder in us and lifts us up out of the darkness again this Christmas. Let me pray. Father, that is my prayer, that every single person here, every one of us, that you would be at work in our hearts, showing us who you are, showing us your love for us, your desire to be with us, just how far through Christ you went to accomplish that. And help us as we marvel at the incarnation, may it be marveling at the plan that you accomplished for us, that would allow us to dwell with you for all time through the blood of Christ on the cross. If there's anyone here that has not placed their faith in Jesus, and through that faith in Jesus, enter into a relationship with you, then I do pray that this would be the season that you would draw them close to you, help them to see Christ, help them to see you accurately, and man, give them the faith that saves. And we ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen.